During the times of World War II, there were many ways of communication. It could be in towns telling your everyday civilians the process with the war and what is going down, or it could be all the way to decoding messages from the Germans so we know their plans. Through the war, communications went through many phases and changes. Communication through decoding. Decoding was a very important part throughout World War II. During this time, the Germans and other enemies would send letters to each other. But they knew that we could easily intercept those messages, so they made a special code for them that only they were supposed to know. It was very important that the special people known as decoders would do their best to intercept the incoming messages. That way, the United States would get an idea if an attack was coming, or where they could place their men for an attack for us to take advantage of. How they told people back home. During World War II, there were many problems about how to get information back home to the civilians. Newspapers were one very effective way of just telling the news, but it wasn't very exciting. During this time, cameras were starting to become a very popular thing, with many photographers being involved taking pictures with the soldiers in the battlefield, showing how they lived, what it was like, and really just showing the everyday civilians. Communication within units. The ground units used the new and upcoming electronically invented typewriter that would send the transmission and they would receive it at the same time. Often between the units, they would use Morse code as their secret code. Now, they did not use this for the more important codes due to the higher chance of it being decoded, but for fast and easy communication between the units, they used the electronic codes. Encrypted codes. The United States had a very complex code in which different words would mean different things, such as the invasion of the beaches of Normandy. They obviously didn't use the exact name of the beaches because then the Germans would have known exactly where they were going to attack. Instead, they used the names of states back at the homeland. Now, not everyone knew the code, but the ships of the United States understood, so they were able to take the beach by surprise without the enemy knowing. During the times of World War II, there were many factors that fell into place, like battle strategies, allies, and many more. During today's video, we will be talking about the importance of communication and its effects on communication innovations during the time being. There were many new forms of communication, one of them being the way that we decoded messages from the enemy, to expand our knowledge on the way they strategize, where their army was deployed, and even the possibility of where and what their next move was. Decoding was very useful for both sides. Not only did every side have their own way of communicating with each other, but there were many keywords that showed tribute to the homeland that they were fighting for. During the time, the United States used a very complex but a very simple code. Many people know the code from the very famous Battle of D-Day or the invasion of Normandy. Of course, the United States had to inform their allies when and where they would attack, so they used the terms Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword, so the Allies would know where they would attack. Of course, this led to the curiosity of family and friends all wanting to know how they were doing and what was going on. During the time, new inventions like cameras were just becoming a bigger deal. Now, they aren't the cameras you would think of today. They were actually big tripods. You would put your head into the camera and boom, take a picture. These cameras weren't very effective and could take even up to 15 minutes to take a single picture. Now, cameras weren't the only things to inform family and friends back home. On the more middle and lower class sides of society, people would also receive and read newspapers typed by first-hand experienced soldiers. Communicating between units was a little more difficult. They used an electronic typewriter that would send the message directly through to the other units. This was a very effective way to transmit messages fast and easy, but very risky because of how often the enemy would easily intercept the messages through units. Another way units would communicate was through Morse code. Everybody has probably heard of Morse code at least once, but during this time, the United States had a theory that no one yet had really discovered and learned Morse code. And guess what? They were right. The Germans had no idea of the code. The United States had discovered a very successful way to get their messages to ground units with a low chance of Germans finding out what they were saying. Encrypting codes was extremely important. If your code wasn't strong enough, then everyone would know what your army was doing, where you were going, and all the information they needed to defeat your army. Codes were used in many complex ways, but the United States was very clever. When they sent out codes to communicate, they would also send out false information, using the same sort of code that the real message carried, but easier to decode.